and we have to really escalate the noise we make so that we'll be heard.
Welcome, everybody. Hello, this is Gay USA. I'm Ann Northrup. Andy Hum is in London this week, and
I am Chris Cooper, dressed as a picnic table today.
It's getting to spring. It's not quite there yet, but thank you for the thought. We have a ton of news to do this week in catching up on everything. We are acknowledging that last week we had a feeling of euphoria because of what was happening in Indiana and the national reaction to it, and Arkansas too, but we're coming back to earth a little this week to follow up on those and to talk about the assault that continues against LGBT civil rights around the country. But I do want to mention one quick headline here. The federal contractors bill, which is a non-discrimination executive order, actually, from President Obama that says any company doing business with the federal government now may not discriminate on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity, goes into effect this week. It is no longer legal for any of those companies to discriminate against their employees on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity.
That's the good news. Here's some of the bad news. Springfield, Missouri recently got LGBT anti-discrimination protections. Well, they're now gone, repealed by the voters in a referendum.
Very bad. And the fixes to the bad laws in Indiana and Arkansas are really not very great. We'll explain that in detail.
Meanwhile, more of these Religious Freedom Restoration Acts, so-called, or RFRAs, have died, good news, in Georgia and Nevada.
Yes, that is good. But in Louisiana, Florida, and Texas, bad bills are still advancing.
Meanwhile, internationally, Ireland has approved adoption by same-sex couples before in advance of their referendum on same-sex marriage on May 22nd.
Say that 6 times quickly.
Really.
But a lesbian couple in Guam is the first to apply for a marriage license there.
And Anne is thrilled that on April 24th, ABC will devote 2 hours of Diane Sawyer interviewing Bruce Jenner.
Thrilled would not be the word I would use. And we'll also tell you that next week we have, Andy will be back, and we'll have as a guest Michelangelo Signorelli talking about his very relevant new book, It's Not Over. So be sure you join us next week too. But let's start in Indiana and Arkansas as a follow-up. Last week, we were right in the heat of it. The attacks were coming against the Religious Freedom Restoration Acts, and we knew that the governors of both Indiana and Arkansas were going to try to amend the bills in some way, and that's what happened after we taped last week's show. But the fix is not so wonderful.
Well, it was pretty epic, the conflict. As far as the fixes, they kind of set things back to before any of this began in terms of what these bills do. They now actually do mirror the federal law that was passed in 1993, I believe, under Clinton.
Bill Clinton.
So they don't really give them any extra ammunition as these bills were originally intended to do, because these next generation bills were specifically designed to give businesses clauses that they could use so that they could deny services to LGBT folks and get away with it. And those clauses are now gone, largely.
Yes and no.
So that's the glass half full.
All right. And in fact, that's exactly what they did in Arkansas. Governor Hutchinson, quoting his son signing a petition against the bill, rather than admitting that Walmart's opposition to the bill may have driven his move, told the legislature they had to change it, and they went back and rewrote it as exactly like the federal bill of 1993, which was written to protect individual religious rights to, say, grow a beard in a situation where others are not allowed to, or
use peyote if you're an American Indian doing a ritual, that kind of stuff, which we as lesbian, gay, transgender people don't have a problem with.
Absolutely not. We support that. It is the new use of these bills that we don't like. But at the same time, Arkansas, we know, has passed a bill recently that says no locality, no town, no city can have a non-discrimination law that goes farther than the state law, which of course does not include sexual orientation or gender identity, and they're sticking to that, and people now want them to pass a statewide SONDA, Agenda, Sexual Orientation, Gender Identity and Expression Non-Discrimination Act, but they're not in any hurry to do that. But there is a movement to do it. In Indiana, the governor said, all right, you know, we never intended to discriminate. That was never our intent.
Lies, lies, lies.
So the legislature got back together, and here's what happened. First of all, they got a committee of the legislature together to rewrite the bill, and the Republicans, in a majority on the committee, because they have a majority in the legislature, kicked the Democrats out of the room. Kicked them out of the room because the Democrats were saying, what you're about to do is not good enough. We need a statewide non-discrimination bill here. We need to repeal this bad religious freedom bill. And the Republicans said, leave the room. You're not even allowed to be here to discuss this. They threw out the Democrats, and then they passed their so-called fix. Now, their fix is just language that says the Religious Freedom Restoration Act in Indiana is not a defense for discrimination for sexual orientation or gender identity. So what they did was merely make a statement in the bill that says you cannot use this bill as a defense if you are charged with discrimination on the basis of religious freedom or gender identity. But what it doesn't say is that there is no statewide non-discrimination bill in Indiana. Some cities and towns, Indianapolis most prominently, have non-discrimination acts, but it turns out that not all the non-discrimination laws in Indiana are equal. For instance, there are a couple of towns where, I'm going to have to find this, where the laws only work, you can only bring a complaint of discrimination if both sides agree to an investigation. That's the discriminator as well as the discriminatee.
Right.
So all the discriminator has to say is, no, I don't want that investigated, and that's the end of it.
So let me tell you why I'm happy to go back to the glass half full.
Okay.
I'm happy for the big picture reason. Because because we were facing these RFRAs, these RFRAs in various states that were really going to look like there was very little we could do to stop them because of all the supermajorities of Republicans in the state legislatures where they were being proposed.
Yes.
The blowback was so severe to Indiana that all these legislatures are rethinking these things. They're pulling back. They're making them like the federal law.
Warren Buffett complained.
Or they're dropping them, exactly. And the fact that big business rallied to our defense. Now, that's great. You know, kudos to big business for that, but I think it's got more to do with us. Individual lesbian, gay, transgender people living our lives openly and without apology, so that big business now has to accept us, has to deal with the fact that if they want the best employees, they've got to not have this stupidity going on in the states where they want to do business.
No question, and it was beautiful to behold, and all the Final Four basketball team coaches issued statements upholding us. The Duke fans wore rainbow ribbons.
Rihanna got up there and gave an expletive-laden support for us.
That's why we can't show it. You can see it online, but believe me, we can't show it here. Yes, very heartwarming, and the governors and mayors who immediately issued orders saying you can't no extraneous travel to Indiana.
But it's more than heartwarming because these RFRAs were basically the last line of defense of the religious right. I don't want to suggest that they don't have any other tools in their evil toolkit.
I'll tell you about that.
But But this was their main strategy after the constant marriage losses, was to say, okay, if we can't stop marriage, we at least want this carve out for people to be able to wash their hands of it. And that main tool now has largely been defanged.
Well, I would disagree that it's been defanged, because such bills are still proceeding in some places. They've been defeated in others. We'll give you the list in a second. And I think this is only step one in their defense. I don't think they're going to pack up their tents and go home and say, oh, well, that didn't work, so
they're not going to go home, but the Republican legislators they were counting on to enact their agenda are going to find this issue so toxic. It's not going to be like a third rail.
Many of them are, but here's something I heard this weekend in a little meeting of my activist pals. A rumor, we'll see how this plays out, that next year, when we have national elections, the presidential election, et cetera, you may remember 2004 when the Republicans got George Bush elected by putting these marriage anti-marriage, constitutional amendments and laws on the ballots around the country, drawing out a conservative vote and getting Bush elected president, re-elected president. Well, the thinking now, or the fear about next year, another big election that the Republicans want to win against Hillary Clinton, maybe, is that they will gin up some referenda along these lines, and that Karl Rove is thinking along these lines right now, and the legislators may now be running scared because they have corporations and donors to answer to who are getting up on their high horses and getting angry. But what happens when you put this to the voters? I think we have one answer to that actually this week, and that comes from Springfield, Missouri.
All right, so let's talk about Springfield.
Let's do. So, as you said, last October, the city council or whatever passed a non-discrimination law that included sexual orientation and gender identity. And Springfield, Missouri is a very home to a lot of religious organizations, particularly the Assembly of God. And they got furious, and they went on a campaign to get rid of this law.
So they got the signatures to put it on the ballot, or to force the city council either to repeal it or to put it on the ballot. The city councilors chose to put it on the ballot, which was obviously the better of the two options. And unfortunately, just last night, as we're taping, it lost by a very narrow margin. 800 votes was the difference, I believe.
Yeah, it was 51.4% to 48.6%, and less than 3% of the voters.
And I should be clear, when I say it lost, I should say the referendum won, which means that LGBT protections were repealed from the city ordinance.
And there are a couple of interesting things about this. Evidently, the registrations of students at Missouri State University never showed up.
What a shock.
That could have made a difference. And
were they black? Isn't that what usually happens to black voters?
Yeah, well, I could talk about getting shot too, but I'll resist that.
No, not today.
But the other thing is that the Assembly of God people put together a couple of campaign videos. I don't think they bought airtime for them, but they put them up on YouTube, and you can see them on YouTube. And I would have shown them on this show today, but they're so depressing that they just really drove me nuts. One of them is a bunch of pastors talking about how if you allow this law to stand, you will have to fight off men dressed as women in bathrooms, and this is against the Bible, and this is against God, and on and on and on for a minute and a half. Very depressing. More depressing is the second video, where you have a very young gay man talking to another pastor and talking about how he's against this non-discrimination bill because it takes away the freedom of the gay bakery to refuse to make a cake with a hateful message on it. And it is just insanity, these two videos, and we'll put them links to them in our show note. If you write to andyhum@aol.com and get on our email list, we'll give you links to them, but they're on YouTube. Springfield, Missouri campaign videos is probably how you can start to find them.
If you can stomach it.
It's horrible, and it's horrible that they will go to any means to try to take away civil rights. It's
without a doubt, the beauty, this is the last I'll say on the subject, the beauty of the whole RFRA in Indiana and Arkansas dust-up is that it has brought into everyone's consciousness that LGBT Americans do not have civil rights protections, because a lot of Americans thought we did. And now I had a conversation with a guy at the office, an ordinary Joe from New Jersey, who not only knew what was going on with this dust-up in Indiana, but he knew the nuances. He knew that there was a difference between the RFRAs that had been passed a generation ago and these new RFRAs, and that it made a difference in terms of LGBT people not being protected. He knew this, and he doesn't follow this stuff. That's a beautiful thing.
And it's also probably the result of a little more sophistication from the mainstream media in the way they've been reporting this. As I watched the coverage, I didn't always think the coverage was terribly sophisticated, but they had some basic facts down that they kept repeating. And first of all, this was in the top 2 or 3 stories for 2 weeks. That was amazing. And they did an okay job of doing some basic facts. They had some basic, simple storylines that they kept repeating, and that is how your guy from New Jersey could figure that out, because that is exactly what they were saying. So we will keep pushing the nuances of this, but we are making progress in all of this. I'm not trying to say that we're not. And I would point out that in Georgia, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act was expired in the legislature this year, and the governor has said that he wants a balanced 1993 version. Now, I don't like passing any version because I don't think they need any extra protection. But
well, and also they're going to have to fight Coca-Cola, which I think Coca-Cola is the equivalent in Georgia of maybe what Walmart is to Arkansas. So when Coca-Cola came out against it, that was...
And Delta. And I'm sure there are some athletic teams and stuff there. In Michigan, Governor Rick Snyder, who is a pretty conservative Republican and has messed around with our rights in a lot of ways, said that he would veto an expanded Religious Freedom Restoration Act unless it was accompanied by a statewide non-discrimination bill. Now, Rick Snyder talking about a statewide non-discrimination bill is amazing.
The legislators and the governors are running scared after Indiana.
Yeah.
One of the things that scared them was the travel bans, not because it really affected them so much, but because it was such a powerful statement. It was a symbol.
Yeah.
Well, those travel bans have been lifted, and Roberta Kaplan, the great lawyer who championed Edie Windsor all the way to the Supreme Court, she's not happy. She feels betrayed by Governor Cuomo, New York's governor, who lifted our travel ban against Indiana. And I don't know, I think her criticism is off base. She says she's not satisfied with what's happened, that more needs to happen. Well, of course more needs to happen. But these travel bans were enacted for very specific reasons, namely to get these RFRAs in line with federal law, which happened, at which point you you can't use the sledgehammer 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and expect it to remain effective. So
it's hard to tell. We certainly boycotted South Africa for many, many, many years trying to get rid of apartheid, but it's hard to imagine keeping these Indiana travel bans in place for a lengthy period of time, which is probably what it's going to take to pass a statewide non-discrimination bill. But Angie's List said the fix is not good enough. The ACLU said the fix is not good enough. On the other hand, the American Family Association called the fix a capitulation that enshrines homosexual behavior as a special right.
Meanwhile, also in the aftermath of Indiana, over 100 tech leaders signed a joint statement demanding LGBT civil rights protections added to the law in all these states and nationally, which is, again, business coming to our defense, and that's great.
It is, and that clearly is a major mover on all of this.
Includes groups like Twitter, YouTube. I just want to give some of the, household names: Facebook, Pinterest, Pandora, Yahoo. So,
And a lot of those were rounded up by Bob Wittick, a longtime LGBT activist and rights activist, and a consultant to the corporate world for many years. He's a DC guy and great person, and he has relationships with a lot of these corporations, so he was very instrumental in getting a lot of them on board. And then we have Memories Pizza in not in Indianapolis, in a little south of there, that said, you know, one of their counter women or co-owners was asked, well, would you serve a pizza to a same-sex wedding? And then a lot of jokes about whether you would order pizza for a wedding. But she said, well, no, I wouldn't. That would be against my religion. And
so they shuttered their doors because they were getting death threats and too much publicity.
Don't do those death threats. That's not good. Don't abuse people like that.
So they closed in the short term, but in the meantime, the religious right got all in a kerfluffle and opened up a GoFundMe site for them, which brought in $500,000 for them.
$840,000 when they shut it down.
It's grown since then.
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, boo-hoo, poor Memories Pizza. I'm sure they're crying all the way to the bank.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, in Louisiana, their religious freedom bill is still alive, unfortunately, but it's likely to lose the controversial language, much as Arkansas's did. So we'll have to keep an eye on that and see what actually happens.
Well, I hope so, because Bobby Jindal is going on TV saying he's all for the Religious Freedom Acts. He's not backing down. And the one that's been proposed in Louisiana says that businesses, individuals, may refuse to give equal benefits to same-sex legally married couples as they do to their heterosexual married employees. Unbelievable that they would allow that. You think this is just about some message on a cake. No, it is not. It is way broader than that, and they're just trying to slip it in with that little example, and really they have a much bigger agenda.
Well, the bill's sponsor, State Representative Mike Johnson, he himself says, quote, it seems to be causing more confusion than it's worth.
Maybe. In Nevada, 2 Religious Freedom Restoration Act bills died, and they are proposing an expansion of their statewide non-discrimination bill, because we talk about these non-discrimination bills as covering employment, housing, and public accommodations, and that's the standard trio. But in fact, they need to go beyond that. They need to cover education, they need to cover credit, they need to cover government programs, and so Nevada is getting hip to this and is talking about actually expanding the reach of their non-discrimination bill, which would be terrific. But in Florida, the thing this week, and I should check my iPad to see where it stands, we're waiting for word on what happens with a proposal on adoption in Florida. Florida historically had a law that rejected same-sex couples as adoptive parents, and then a court decision finally overturned that about 5 years ago, and then they finally took it out of their written law. And now they're trying to reimpose that under the guise of religious freedom. And there's a big proposal to repass a bill that would allow any private agency with any kind of religious opinion to refuse to let same-sex couples be foster parents or adoptive parents. And so they held a legislative hearing on this, and this 10-year-old boy came to testify about his experience as a foster child. And halfway through his testimony, the presiding legislator said, sorry, that your 1 minute is up, you're done, goodbye. And so Equality Florida, which is the great statewide civil rights LGBT group, took this kid, took him into their offices, sat him down and said, look, we're going to videotape your entire testimony, 2.5 minutes, and circulate that. And we thought you should see this young man because he is terrific, and he's speaking about his experience with a loving couple of dads.
Good morning, my name is Nathaniel Gill. I am 10 years old, and I oppose this bill. I was born in Miami. At the age of 4 months, my 4-year-old brother was feeding me and changing my diapers. When he went to the neighbors begging for food for us, someone called DCF and we were placed in foster care. I was lucky to be placed with my brother. He was all I had, and he has looked after me since I was born. In the home DCF placed us, we had 2 dads. We were happy and liked our new home a lot. But when I was 2 years old, DCF decided we should get adopted. They told my dads that I was healthy and young enough so that they could find me a good home, but they said my brother would not be adoptable. When he was in 1st grade, and they didn't think anyone would want the 2 of us. For me, that would have been a horrible mistake. But somebody did want the 2 of us, our 2 dads. I didn't want to get adopted by myself. I didn't want a new family. My brother and my 2 dads were the only family I knew. Lucky for me, my dads were very stubborn. They fought the state for 4 years. They won and beat the law. And that is how we made a forever family. My dads are pretty much like any other parents. They taught me my ABCs, proper grammar, but they also taught me how to play basketball, football, to swim, and to ski. Our new little brother was in a group home for 7 months because no one wanted him because he is autistic. There weren't any parents there, just people who worked there. They fed him and bathed him, but they didn't love him. We felt bad for him, so my dad made him part of our family. Discrimination won't get more kids adopted. It will just make them end up in foster homes and group homes. Thank you, Equality Florida.
And thank you.
That kid, when he looks up and gives that half smile, the heart melts. He's adorable.
You're ready to adopt him.
He's adorable. He's the best kid ever.
Can you imagine cutting him off and saying your time is up?
No.
All right.
It's an outrage.
Well, we'll see what happens with this Florida law. All right, let's hit another few. In Texas, there are 20 bills pending, and there's going to be a big rally in Austin on Monday. So if you are in the Texas area and want to come out to demonstrate against these bad bills that are still on the plate in Texas, Monday in Austin.
All right. Meanwhile, some more fallout from the Indiana kerfluffle. President Obama was speaking at the Easter prayer breakfast.
Oh, yes.
And he mentioned or made an allusion to the religious freedom laws, saying, "On Easter, I do reflect on the fact that as a Christian, I am supposed to love. And I have to say that sometimes when I listen to less than loving expressions by Christians, I get concerned." As the crowd began to murmur, the president backed off, saying, "But that's a topic for another day."
That's pretty bold.
It was.
Yeah. Although, you know, you could be bolder too. Well, all right. So in Colorado, here's the bakery news. In Colorado, the Department of Regulatory Agencies upheld the right of a lesbian-owned bakery to refuse to write on a cake anti-gay words, and said it was not, you know, it was a decision about the words, not discrimination against a group of Christians or whatever.
This is the Zucker Bakery in Denver, I believe, and
yes.
I think they actually offer Bible-shaped cakes.
Absolutely.
So it wasn't even that; it was just the specific message that had to go on the cakes. So.
And then in Florida, a bakery there got a call from an Arizona activist pastor who evidently does a lot of this in his spare time. He wanted to order a cake that said, "We do not support gay marriage," a sheet cake. They said, no, I think we'll forget that. And they've received, as a result, both a lot of harassing calls and community support. And in New York, to counter this image of what Christians, so-called, are doing. A Buffalo pastor went out in the street handing out cupcakes to gay people.
Beware the bakery false equivalency. It's one thing to refuse to put a specific message because it's derogatory to other people. It's another thing to refuse to just bake a cake for a ceremony. And if you ask me, you are not participating in the ceremony by baking a cake for it.
And as someone pointed out, does that mean that Christian gun sellers are participating in murders if they sell a gun?
Very good point.
A little poignant. And Rick Santorum was on one of the Sunday shows saying, very happily being able to say, well, should gays have to print the signs for the Westboro Baptist Church that say God hates fags? No, they have their own printing press. Thank you very much.
Meanwhile, as we're on the subject of political buffoons, Tom Cotton got on CNN, and in talking about Indiana's religious freedom bill, he basically said, oh, well, I think it's important that we have a sense of perspective. In Iran, they hang you for the crime of being gay. So we should just be happy, I guess, that they're just trying to take our rights away. I am embarrassed that this man comes from my alma mater.
And in North Dakota, the legislature there killed a proposed statewide non-discrimination act that would cover sexual orientation and gender identity, saying there was no need for it. That's one of their favorite things. There's no need for it. Well, the reason you may not have seen a lot of complaints is because you haven't had any bills that outlawed it, so people have not complained so loudly. And so what if there are only a few cases? Don't you want to outlaw those cases?
They've been trying to pass it there for years, as I understand it, and it passed the Senate this year, correct? And then I think it got killed in the House.
Very possibly.
But what the Democrats of the House and Senate did, and they're, of course, a minority in North Dakota, but they gave a letter to the governor, Jack Dalrymple, trying to encourage him, demanding that he issue an executive order to protect lesbian and gay
he put out a statement after it was killed saying he was disappointed.
Right, and telling that the values of the state should not cause anyone in the state government to discriminate on the basis of sexual orientation.
But he
won't do an executive order.
Well,
he hasn't.
He didn't speak up while the bill was under consideration either. He might have had a little more influence. But there is certainly a move by local activists to revisit this and to push this again. And a Fargo coffee shop put up you know how in Indiana, the Indianapolis Star newspaper did a front page
Fix This Now.
Well, the newspaper in Fargo covered their front page with mugshots of all the legislators who voted against the bill. And a Fargo, the newspaper did that. The coffee shop put that in their front window and said, "We refuse to serve all of these legislators."
That's beautiful.
Cute. And Tony Perkins of the American Family Association wants Walmart boycotted, but these right-wing boycotts are not working. And there are, you know, I was proud to read that the Springfield activists who got defeated this week in that vote were not discouraged. They said, look, we know this is going to happen. We know this is an ongoing fight. We're not giving up. We're hanging in there. We absolutely expect defeats as well as victories, and this doesn't discourage us in the least. And what would discourage me, of course, is that we're voting on people's civil rights, and that is what I fear next year in if they get more ballot measures going. But which is why I like court decisions, because what they do is make clear that these are inherent civil rights. But these activists around the country, you know, you have the outpouring of support from the businesses, from the politicians, from the entertainers, but it's the grassroots activists who are doing this work day after day, and they are not discouraged. They are energized by all this, and they are going to continue to fight for these statewide bills, to defeat the bad bills, and for a federal non-discrimination act, which is what we need.
Well, I've got one final note out of Indiana, an interesting little twist, which is the president of the Indiana Family Institute, Kurt Smith, has actually left his job, forced out of his job from the Taft law firm. One of its biggest clients is a corporation called Cummins, and they're based in Indiana, and they were opposed to the Indiana RFRA. So he was sort of left in the position of their biggest client opposing the thing that he's pushing as head of the Indiana Family Institute. And eventually he was forced out, depends on who you talk to, or left his job of his own volition at that law firm. So fallout from Indiana further.
Well, and in the same vein, I want to mention a case out of Omaha, Nebraska. Yet again, we hear these regularly, and for all those Christians who complain that they need these bills because all they really want to do is just protect Christian bakeries or whatever, and really they have no intention of discriminating. But yet again, a Catholic high school teacher has been fired, this time from Scott Catholic High School in Omaha. Matthew Elledge, English and speech teacher, I think we have a picture of him, there he is. He went to the school and told them he was going to marry his male partner, and they said, not as a Catholic school teacher, you're not. Now, he's not teaching religion, he's not a priest, he's just a high school English teacher and very successful speech team coach. And they said no, and he said, all right, I will delay the wedding until, you know, the end of the year or whatever, and that's so I can keep teaching my students. And they said, not only will we not accept that, but you have to break up your relationship if you want to stay here and teach.
Oh yeah, right. Like that's going to happen.
Well, it didn't happen, and he has been fired.
Wow.
All right, other hopping around. Let's go to transgender news, because I have about 85 stories on that. First of all, the White House held a trans women of color briefing for Women's History Month in March, at the end of the month, put together by the National LGBTQ Task Force. So trans issues in the White House, that's pretty revolutionary and terrific.
And then also a New York-based hedge fund executive who tried to fund an overturn of a transgender law out in California, he's gotten a fine because he didn't follow the rules. Look, if you're going to get active in politics, you got to follow the same rules as everybody else. But he didn't make his filings on time like you're supposed to, and so he got hit with a, I believe it was a $2,500 fine, sorry, $2,400 fine, and didn't succeed in overturning the law that allows transgender people to use whatever bathroom they wish to.
The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission federally has found that the U.S. Army discriminated against a trans woman who's a civilian employee of the Army in Alabama, although a disabled veteran of the Army. She was harassed by her coworkers, told to use the wrong bathroom, wrong pronouns used with her, and the EEOC has decided again that discrimination against trans people is a violation of Title VII of the Civil Rights Act as sex discrimination. They are pushing this as an analysis, and this is taking hold. This is one way we may not have to fight the battle federally for a non-discrimination act if we can get both trans discrimination and sexual orientation discrimination defined as already a violation of the Civil Rights Act. Then we don't have to expand that act. We don't have to pass new legislation. It's in, but we're working on that. Meanwhile, in a sort of gender nonconforming story from Monroe, Louisiana, another high school student, Claudetia Love, an out lesbian, very popular, very successful.
Honor student.
Honor student at the high school there, was told she could not wear a tuxedo to the prom because girls wear dresses and boys wear tuxes.
That's her right there.
She's very cute. So, so her story gets out. She and her friends had decided they were not going to go to the prom
Though
because
she was
of this.
pretty upset because she felt like she was missing a big piece of what her youth is about.
Of course. So the ACLU got involved, and the Department of Justice, and the National Center for Lesbian Rights, and they all informed the school that this was not appropriate. The students had put together a petition for her and presented it to the school and the faculty rejected the petition.
Well, lo and behold, the faculty has backtracked, and they are now saying that, yes, she will be allowed to attend the prom in her tuxedo, which makes the whole episode probably a really great learning experience for all those students.
Definitely, but Claudetia is not, she's still a little upset. She's not sure whether she is going to go to the prom, but she was happy at first, and then she was still upset and whatever. But these schools, you cannot win these cases. You ought to read the papers. The Department of Justice has weighed in on behalf of a trans inmate in Georgia, Ashley Diamond, who is petitioning for the right to be treated with hormones while in prison. This made the front page of the New York Times in a two-part series on consecutive days. Huge front page story in the Times. Ashley Diamond in Georgia being mistreated by the prison. She went into the prison, had been on hormones for like 17 years, and the prison immediately classified her as a man, put her in a men's prison, where she has been raped 7 times, and they refused her all hormone treatment and completely abused her. The Department of Justice is helping. Now the courts have said she must be treated, and so now they've given her some hormone patch. But they need to do a lot more, and they need to put her in a women's prison. That is not her. That's another case, which we are about to get to. That is Michelle Norworthy, who is in a California prison, and a California judge has ordered that she be provided treatment and surgery, which is unusual. So a little more enlightenment coming to every corner of the world. But the relentless mistreatment and refusal to acknowledge the diversity of the world's population is discouraging.
It's getting better, hopefully. 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 Slowly but surely.
Yeah.
Are we ready for other news?
No, I've got
You've
about
got more
6
trans
more
news.
stories,
Keep
but
going.
I'll whip through these. In Pennsylvania, a judge says a trans male student at the University of Pittsburgh cannot use the men's locker room. The governor is hasn't transitioned enough. Really? Those men are so threatened by a trans man. David Boyce is involved in this case. The governor of Pennsylvania wants a statewide non-discrimination law, which Pennsylvania does not have. Based on some of this, that's in the works. The 2 trans women who were shot driving mistakenly into the National Security Agency last week. We didn't point out that they were trans women who had stolen the car from a John they had been contracted by the night before, and they took a wrong turn off the highway, and one of them shot dead and the other injured by the National Security Agency. And the reason they were trying to flee was because they'd stolen the car. Now, sad. What else have I got here? Well, coming up on April 24th, set your DVRs, Diane Sawyer and Bruce Jenner for 2 hours. And E! is going to evidently do its documentary. And on May 31st, on the Kardashian series, Bruce is supposed to be coming out to the family. I'm sure they'll all be shocked.
I just had a terrible thought.
Yes.
Do you think they're going to televise the surgery?
I certainly hope not, but they may, in their own ways, do something. I don't know how they're going to do 2 hours on this unless they do the entire history of gender relations in world history. But I'm sure they'll find a way to try to grab ratings by filling 2 hours. Yes, we can move on to other things.
All right, well, I'm itching to talk, just because I just find this such a great idea, to talk about California possibly changing one of its 2 statutes in Washington, D.C. Now, the thing you have to know is that there's a statuary where every state gets to have 2 statues. I didn't know this, but there it is.
Statuary Hall in the U.S. Capitol.
So California has right now, one of them is Reverend Junipero Serra, an 18th century Catholic priest who established California missions and is about to be canonized by Pope Francis, blah, blah. But now there's a movement to replace him with Sally Ride.
Love it.
The first woman in space, the youngest person ever to go into space, and as we found out posthumously, a lesbian. It's a terrific idea. Hopefully it'll go through. Again, every state only gets to pick 2. So it becomes a little bit of a sort of jostling contest because, you know, if you've got to oust one to put in another, there's inevitably some group that feels like they're being slighted. The interesting postscript to all of this is that, oh gosh, which state is it? Where's Billy Graham from?
North Carolina.
North Carolina. So North Carolina is also considering swapping out its statue of replacing one of a racist former governor with the homophobic Billy Graham.
Wow.
So,
and of course, California's other statue in Statuary Hall is Ronald Reagan, who hasn't been there long enough to be replaced. You have to be there for at least 10 years before you're eligible for replacement. Congratulations to the Greater New York Councils of the Boy Scouts of America, who have hired 18-year-old Pascal Testier, Eagle Scout, to work at a summer camp of the Boy Scouts. He's there on the left receiving his Eagle Scout badge. They're doing this in defiance of the National Organization of Boy Scouts, which still has a ban on any Scout leaders being out gay, although the Scouts themselves can be. The National Organization is sort of pondering this. One is, I don't see them suddenly backing down, but who knows? They're a largely Mormon organization. They won the right in 2000 at the Supreme Court to declare themselves as having an intrinsic message that was homophobic and to be able to make their own decisions. We'll see. It's an interesting challenge, but generally what happens, this isn't the first time that local councils have tried to do something and have gay people prominent, and they generally get batted down. Yeah. And the Mormon Church, meanwhile, held one of its annual conventions in Utah, and they've been given a lot of credit for working with the gay community to come up with this compromise non-discrimination law in Utah.
You had a guest talking about just that 2 or 3 weeks ago.
Kate Kendall. And saying, you know, this is Utah only, they're very special, and so they have a lot of religious exemptions built into it, including the Boy Scouts. But they went right back to their old ways at this convention. We hate same-sex marriage, it's awful, we could never accept that, and these are all counterfeit lifestyles.
All right, but Ann, you say that as if they ever left their old ways.
Well, I'm saying they were given credit for working out this non-discrimination compromise, and so people thought, the Mormons are changing.
Yeah, but I think the most you can ask of any of these hard right religions is that they recognize that in the civil space and in the civil sphere, they can't get their way.
Oh, yeah? Well, how about in Eureka Springs, Arkansas, where a Christian group runs an annual Jesus parade, and they said, and they told the Methodists they could not be in the parade because they wanted to carry a banner that said, Jesus loves all are welcome.
Well, okay, but just to be fair and accurate, fair and balanced? No, fair and accurate.
Yes.
I believe they never got explicitly told why they were being banned. Not that anyone has to say it, because why else are they excluding them if they're picking on this one denomination and telling them they alone can't participate in the Jesus parade, and they never told them why, but you can put 2 and 2 together.
Well, in Oregon, the 2014 Teacher of the Year, Brett Bigham, has been fired for being too out. He has been told he lost focus on his students. See, it's not over. See you next week, Mike Signorelli. But in Idaho, there is a new law that mandates that the Department of Education and schools do some anti-bullying training.
All right, are you ready to go semi-international?
I am.
All right. Semi-international, let's start, I'm going to start.
Oh, no, wait, we have a couple of marriage stories.
Oh, yeah,
We've
that's
skipped
true.
that part. The Arkansas Supreme Court is delaying same-sex marriage, even though it's been mandated by a federal court ruling, by demanding that there be a new case on whether a new justice has to weigh in on this. The Supreme Court is going to get to this before they do. Republicans in the U.S. Congress submitted a brief to the Supreme Court on the marriage cases, but whereas the Democrats had over 200 people signing on to their pro-same-sex marriage case, every Democratic senator except Joe Manchin, many from the House, the Republicans could only scare up 52 Republicans in the whole U.S. Congress to sign on to the anti-marriage.
That's a sign of progress right there.
Only 6 senators.
And while you're talking about briefs have been flowing in over the last week from the side opposed to same-sex marriage into the Supreme Court, making all kinds of wacky claims. I'll spare you the specifics. You can look them up online if you want. But the briefs are coming in, and of course the case will be...
Mostly they're states' rights briefs. They say states have always been able to make their own marriage laws, and you know, a national ruling would trump that. Well, they forget the national ruling against you know, miscegenation in marriage, and that's always been true, except you can't discriminate. You can have state rules about marriage, but you are not allowed to discriminate, and that's what the Windsor decision was, and that's what we expect this to be.
Well, meanwhile, semi-internationally, in Guam, a pair of lesbians applied for a marriage license. There they are right there.
Loretta and Kathleen.
Yeah, Loretta Pangalainen and Kathleen Aguero. I'm not sure if I pronounced their names right. Both 28. They were rejected, but they are going to appeal. So good for them for taking it up in Guam. I think Guam is in the 9th Circuit in terms of what court has jurisdiction.
And the 9th Circuit, of course, has legalized same-sex marriage. So with any luck, any court in Guam will abide by that. They've been together for 9 years. They are foster parents. Thank you for stepping forward. And marriage hero Evan Wolfson, head of Freedom to Marry, has been honored by General Mills with a Wheaties box.
That's amazing. That is a cultural watershed.
Well, it's a commemorative box. I don't think they're selling it anywhere, but I think it's just their way of honoring him. But it's fantastic. Can you imagine anything nicer?
That's amazing. Cool. That's great. Congratulations, Evan. You deserve it.
Now on to international news.
All right.
Well, and we're going to start moving lickety-split.
Yeah, the first international story actually takes place here in New York, even though it's international. The former president of the Dominican Republic, Hipólito Mejia, was here in New York pushing his presidency, because there's a lot of Dominicans here.
He's running again, yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry, thank you. He's running again for the presidency. And he made various homophobic statements, reiterated his opposition to same-sex marriage, and said that some were trying to convince him to wear a wig to bring in more votes and to sit like the way an F word does. Can we say the F word on this show?
Yes.
The way a faggot does, but he's not going to do that, and the whole audience bursts into laughter. Fortunately, our city council speaker, Melissa Mark Viverito, tore into him and said that is not acceptable.
A lot of blowback on that, but a lot of trouble. U.S. black gay pastors from the Fellowship of Affirming Ministries are going to go to Africa to spread a pro-gay message to counteract the white U.S. evangelical pastors who've been stirring up trouble over there. And in Nigeria, LGBT activists are cautiously optimistic about the new President General Muhammadu Buhari. He was gay bashed during the election by outgoing President Goodluck Jonathan and accused of supporting same-sex marriage. I'm not sure he does, but he's perceived as someone who may not be quite as punitive. We'll keep an eye on him.
Meanwhile, in Rome, the Vatican has not accepted the accreditation yet so far of Laurent Stefanini, who has been nominated by the French to be their new diplomat over to the Vatican. And he's been waiting over a month now. The post has been empty. And of course, no one's saying why he hasn't been accepted yet. But the key point about Laurent Stefanini is that he's openly gay. And he would be the first openly gay ambassador sent to the Vatican. So
who are we to judge?
Yeah.
In Ireland, they have a big marriage referendum coming up on May 22nd. Polls continue to show same-sex marriage winning 70% of the vote, but we do not count on that. But meanwhile, the legislature there has approved adoption by same-sex couples. That could help with the vote. In Chile, the Constitutional Court has upheld the civil unions law that has been passed, and so now they want the president to sign it and put it into effect. And the U.S. has rejected asylum for a gay Saudi Arabian diplomat who had been working in the consulate in L.A. It came out, the Saudis canceled his passport, he's in limbo. And the U.S. is believed to not be giving him asylum because they don't want to offend the Saudi government.
Oy.
Yeah, so that's a mess. And in St. Petersburg, Russia, a court has okayed a ban on a website that helps LGBT teens.
AIDS news?
Yes.
Big AIDS news, just breaking as we take this. 3 former managers of AIDS Healthcare Foundation, which is a very combative organization. They're the ones who have been fighting against Truvada as PrEP.
Yeah.
And these 3 former managers charged that AHF has been running a kickback scheme to enrich itself to the tune of $20 million in false claims.
What they're saying is that they paid patients and employees to refer people to their services for which they were then reimbursed by the government, and that they have defrauded the government of about $20 million by doing this and by channeling patients into their services, which may or may not be needed or useful.
Now, this suit was filed in Florida, but AHF has efforts across 12 states. So.
In Texas, they have moved millions of dollars from HIV and STD prevention to abstinence-only education at the behest of Representative Stuart Spitzer, who wants everybody to not have sex until marriage. He said, "I waited till I was 29 and got married," and someone yelled back at him, "Was that your choice?"
We laugh, but this cannot end well for Texas.
Texas is number 3 in the country in HIV cases, number 3 in teen pregnancy. This bill also prevents Planned Parenthood or any other abortion affiliates from doing sex ed in the schools. This is an ostrich head in the sand approach. It's terrible. Yep. We have about a minute left. In entertainment news, Michael Sam is off Dancing with the Stars because he can't dance, but his last performance and talking about being rejected by his father was very moving.
George Takei has launched It Takeis 2. It's hard to say that. It Takeis 2 is the name of the web series starring him and his husband. I haven't seen it yet, but anything George Takei does, I love.
I saw at a screening a movie called Black Souls, which opens this weekend in New York and around the country over the next week or two. It's a Southern Italian mafia movie, and it's a little different. It's not all violence. It's really about relationships, and it's a little slow, but it really draws you in. And
I saw a trailer for it, and I was unmoved. But
you have to settle into it. Okay. On May 16th, HBO will air Bessie, Queen Latifah as Bessie Smith, Monique as Ma Rainey, directed by Dee Reese, who did Pariah and who's been a guest on this show.
Love her.
Yeah, she's terrific, so fingers crossed. And on June 17th, the Oakland A's will do their first LGBTQ Pride Night, as will a lot of other baseball teams. Thank you, Chris.
My pleasure as always, Andy.
Andy back next week. Guest Mike Signorelli. See you all then. Thank you.